Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
Hello and welcome to today's Battle Mech review. Today we're going to be looking at the Axman, and I'm starting the recording of this during my lunch break on a Monday. Well, Monday here on our True at least, because the kids had monopolized the computer most of the weekend. Perfectly okay with that. They had a desire to 100% Metal Wolf Box, a fun game from a long time ago, but I mean, I've got the Metal Wolf collection on the computer and they wanted to go through it. The Axman has been fairly popular for the about 100 years since its release, and it got a big boost in popularity after Adam Steiner was known to be piloting one, and, well, there was one showed in the Tarkat Broadcast Corporation's big TV show about him. So it's another Banzai design, another hatchet-wielding maniac, so let's get into it. The Hatchetman had been quite successful for Team Banzai, and Defiance was really happy with the sales they were getting from it. The hatchet was quite a functional weapon at the end of the Succession War era, and, well, you were just not going super fast, but people were going to get into range so you could smack them with the hard end of the stick most of the time. I mean, you don't have any fancy ER lasers in that era, you don't have any fancy clan LRMs. I mean, fights during the Succession War generally ended up with people punching and kicking. The hatchet was just the evolution of that. What was left was to make the design a little bit bigger and a little bit badder, so people could be even more afraid of an hatchet. Mathematics were really what brought the Axman forward. A mech's hatchet needs to be carried by a mech at least 60 tons to be able to take out another's machine's head in one clean blow. So when they were doing the design on it, they decided to go with a 65-ton machine just to give you a little bit of leeway. People complained that the original Hatchetman was poorly protected, so once again, Matt led the Team Banzai to tell them how big the machine needed to be well protected enough. Speed was also going to be a problem on the original Hatchetman, but in a heavier mech, 64 kilometers per hour, like the original Hatchetman, would be perfectly reasonable, because the most reasonable mech of the era in the heavyweight category is either the Orion or the Thunderbolt, and both of them go 64 kilometers per hour in a straight line when things go well. The Federated Commonwealth kind of covered the development of the Axman by building the Caesar, but that's really a weird red herring if you ask me. People knew the people at Team Banzai were working on something bigger, and everybody was expecting something like the Axman. It dropped in 3048, so just a little bit before the clan invasion, and it was immediately adopted by the Federated Commonwealth. When fighting against peer or near-peer enemies, like let's say the Capellan Confederation, it was pretty successful. You normally didn't need to get into brawling range, and that's how the Inner Sphere rolled at this time, and that's what the Axman was really fantastic at. The massive amount of punch that it brought to the table was deadly to anything smaller than it was, and it was also a threat to anything that was bigger than it was. So the Axman was basically a Hatchetman on steroids. The big problem is that the Axman was not meant to face something that was going to be peer or near peer, but they were going to be fighting something that was strictly superior. Clan mechs were faster, had longer range with similar weapons, had better armor, better internals, etc. Yes, future Archon Adam Steiner did use an Axman to some level of success, which was greatly exaggerated in that Tridio series, where about the time where he was leading the first Somerset Strikers. But I mean, if you face an Axman with, let's say, a Summoner, things are usually not going to look very good for the Axman in the long run. If you're facing a Hellbringer, well, if you manage to catch it, you are going to be able to blow it up because an Hellbringer has the armor of a snowblower. But I mean, if you compare it to top tier, let's say Clan Omnimex, the Axman is found to be a little bit lackluster. The Fedcom Civil War was a very rough time for the Axman, however. The design was fully integrated, meaning that you had parts that needed both sides of the realms in order to be properly built. Defiance and Johnston, the two companies that were building the Axman, both in Lyran Alliance and Federated Commonwealth and Federated Suns territory, all that whole bundle there, it started redesigning couplings, assemblies, weapon systems, engines, and everything in order to bring some new variants that were going to be strictly local. The only people making tons of money still and ongoing is Team Banzai, who had licensing agreement with both companies and was just packing in the money from the sales of the designs on both sides of the border. The Axman really used some of the most advanced technology that was available in 3048. Honestly, if you look at the mechs on paper, this is one of the newest machine of the time. And even machines that were being refitted with new technology, well, this was still probably more advanced than them. You had 10 double heat sinks, which were pretty much brand new at the time. I mean, they had been around since the War of 3039 in various ways. There were freezers before, which blew up when they were damaged. I mean, the recovery of the technology was pretty darn useful. And those were kept inside a Magna 260 XL engine to save on a little bit of weight. This would be pretty good if you were just fighting other peer nations, but I mean, when you're facing the clans, it starts being a bigger liability. You have a top speed of 64 kilometers per hour, like we said earlier, and it has Ildco Model 12 jump jets, giving it a jump range of 120 meters, making it fairly mobile for a mech. Size at 65 tons. The body is made of standard material, nothing fancy there, but it uses 10 tons of ferrofibrous plate to give it a decent amount of protection for a mech its size. Not as much as it could, but good enough that it can get into brawls with things like a Thunderbolt. The armor is protected by case on top of it, so if the ammo of the big gun that's on there goes, well, you lose the mech, but you just have to change the engine, and you should be good to go. First off was the AXM-1N, which packed a Luxor Devastator 20 class autocannon on its shoulder. The problem was that the gun had a tendency to jam quite often, and people didn't like having their big guns jam when they were trying to fight people. So it kind of went and needed some modifications later on. Later models, anything built after 3050, you shouldn't have any big problems with the Luxor jamming there. The right arm had a big 5-ton hatchet along with a trio of medium lasers. The big problem is that you can't shoot the medium lasers effectively when you're trying to swing that hatchet down. Some pilots are pretty good and are able to do it, but you have to have some specialists in order to be able to do that. On the opposite arm, you get a large pulse laser, which is rather accurate, and it shares the same range bracket as all your other weapons, meaning that once things get within a couple meters, let's say, you're going to be able to blow them out the sky or blow them out the field, and then if they're still around or if they're in a bad shape but limping around, you'll be able to get close and just swing that hatchet at them. The Luxor having those massive issues did lead to a quick reassessment of the design, and within a few months, the official release of the AXM-2N came out. This one replaced the one big gun with a pair of shoulder-mounted 15-rack LRMs fed by 2 tons of ammo. It's not a whole lot, but you're going to be able to do decent amounts of bombardments with that. This turns the Axman into a fire support unit, and it's able to jump around, which can be pretty useful in various situations, including urban fighting. And Adam Steiner's Axman in the Treadio show was that particular model, even though we have varying reports as to what he was actually piloting at the time. Defiance used the Axman as a test bed later on for their light engine technology, then that was around 3060. This new AXM-3S went to the same speed as the original, same jump range, kind of a similar equipment, but this time using a Defiance disintegrator LB-20X, which is far more reliable, with 2 tons of both slugs and clusters. Well, usually, I mean, you can load 4 tons of slugs if you want. The standard medium lasers are replaced with ER medium lasers, giving you a little bit more range, which is not a bad thing. And then I'll replace the large pulse laser on the opposite arm, which had to be completely removed because, well, even with a light engine, you're still a lot heavier than an XL. It's still a safer machine using that light engine, but you do lose a little bit on firepower. To increase security, once again, you got a Guardian ECM on there, which is pretty useful against Artemis guidance or targeting computers or a few different other things. 3069 brought us an evolution to that 3S model in an attempt to give it a little bit more utility and a little bit more range. What it did use, though, was a weird weapon for the Lyrans. I mean, I would expect them to stick a Gauss rifle on there at this point, but no, this one uses a Rotary AC-5, which was more seen on the Federated Sun side of the border at the time. It's fed by a very reasonable 4 tons of reload, so it's going to be able to stay in the fight fairly long, and you get an extra heat sinks in order to compensate for, well, all that extra heat that gun's going to generate. You get an extra medium pulse laser as well, which is not a bad thing, gives you a little bit more short-range punch. It is fairly accurate, decent against battle armor, at least. And a C3 slave unit allows you to join various C3 networks as long as there's a master around. This is an odd addition, but you see a lot of mech in that era having just a C3 slave plugged in and not enough C3 masters floating around. Johnston of New Syrtis was also building Axman at the time. They were the ones building them for the Federated Sons. Of course, at that point during the Civil War and after the Civil War, a lot of changes had to be done to the design so it would actually work with no Defiance parts in them. But, it still worked fairly well, and by 3071, they decided to release their brand new version with the AXM-4D. This one has the jump jets taken out, reducing your mobility by a fair amount here, and the main gun is actually replaced with a quartet of light 5-class autocannons fed by a meager 2 tons of ammo. Yes, you can use specialty ammo on their precision or armor piercing, but you're not going to get a whole lot of bang for your buck. 2 medium lasers replace the large pulse lasers, and all of your weapons are now tied to a targeting computer that is mounted on the left shoulder. You get a low heat curve, so I guess you can just stick single heat sinks in, but I mean, they don't take room in the internals of the mechs as they're all mounted in the engine anyways, so I'm not quite sure where that decision came from. There was another weird one that came out around that time with the AXM-6X, which was a test bed for all sorts of weapon systems and weapon manufacturing and weapon associating, and it was a really odd one. This one did not feature the hatchet. Instead, it had an arm-mounted gun mount where you can fit just about everything from a light autocannon to a bunch of heavy flamers. The shoulders both packed a Thunderbolt 15 missile launcher for single bing punch action compared to regular volley fires of LRMs. Thunderbolts have been getting a little bit more popular recently. They have their own limitation, and if you're facing something with decent amount of anti-missile systems, they're not as efficient. At least you're not going to be able to deal as much chip damage in the long run. It's a little bit weird. The engine is a clan-graded XL engine, so each of them had to be handcrafted with equipment that you either stole or imported at very high price, and it was also tied to a supercharger, which makes it even more expensive. And to close the deal, you add a pair of ER medium laser on each hip, because that's where you put ER medium lasers, I guess. This one here is probably the weirdest Axman around, but it did have a production model. You will recognize the letter here as the 3083 AXM-6T is a technical, which basically means that was a big Banzai team moneymaker. It cuts down on the experimental and the advanced stuff to go down to, well, something a little bit more basic, but it's still an odd Axman. You had a standard rated XL engine instead of a clan one, so this one is a little bit easier to manufacture and it's not tied to a supercharger, so it's a little bit more reliable. Your main weapons are still those shoulder-mounted 15 Thunderbolt launchers, fed by 2 tons of reload. You get those funky IP mounts of ER medium lasers still, so you still get about the same amount of punch than the original. The armor is now made up of 11.5 tons of light ferrofibrous, meaning that it's pretty much as armored as a 65-ton mech can be, and the skeleton is made of endo steel. This is an odd duck. You'll probably not see a whole lot of these floating around, but they exist in the wild, and every once in a while I get one in the shop and everybody wonders what happened to it. The AFFS retook New Syrtis and the Johnston factories from the Capellan Confederation in 3146, and what they did once they had access to it is rush a new production model of the Axman out to refill their military. This one is the AXM-5N, and it uses 12 tons of light ferrofibrous to make up the armor, which is fairly significant on a mech this size. This one does have the hatchet and has 3 ER medium lasers on the same arm, kind of like the original. You do get a decent bit of range for the energy that it's going to generate, but you can't swing the hatchet and shoot the lasers at the same time unless the pilot is actually pretty good. The other weapons are actually imported from the Tiburon Khanate of the Clan Seafox and some of our more local friends here in the Oregon Trade Alliance. You get a AG-20 mounted on the shoulder, protected by a Case 2 system, meaning that it's very well protected, and it gives you 3 tons of reload in order to be able to stand the fight decently long. You're going to be able to blow out pretty much anything that flies close by as well, because this is basically a giant BB gun. The other arm packs a Clan ERPPC, which is better in terms of range than your Large Pulse Laser originally was. But I don't know, maybe I would have gone with a Clan Large Pulse Laser instead. Same weight, better eat curve. You know, it's what the clans probably decided to sell our friends at New Certus. You do have a Garnicium as well to protect you against enemy electronics, and the musculature is now built out of triple strength myomer, meaning that if you do run AUT, you are going to be able to do a whole lot of damage with that hatchet. This is probably one of the latest evolution and the best evolution of the Axman design, unless our friends at Owsley Davion have another thing to say. So do you guys know Battle Lightning? It's a very popular game. A lot of people play it. It's been in diffusion for a little while here. And, well, they have a few little issues with their Chatterweb forums. Every once in a while, people just, drop some information that shouldn't be allowed to be dropped around because they're trying to one-up one another. What we've seen from it, and I've actually seen that model walk in the factory here, is a brand new version of the Axman built off that previous model, with everything being locally sourced. You don't want your main weapons to be built by Clan Seafox, which might always turn on you or stop selling to you if you start being a little bit uppity. We do get the specs for it, and I've seen the darn thing. I'm not sure at first if it was just a custom or if it was the actual thing, but this is what we get. The AG-20 is replaced with a clan-graded Davion-built Ultra 10 class autocannon, similar to what they use in their brand new Jaeger mechs. The engine is also clan-graded, made by our good friends at Good Morning, General Motors. They've been making a whole lot of clan-grade engines recently, and they've been licensing the technology out to various people. The armor is a little bit thinner by about half a ton, and the Guardian ECM is removed, but your arm laser is replaced with a large re-engineered laser, which is going to be very good against reflective plates or against ardent armor. I do think this is a pretty nice design overall. Everything is locally sourced, even though you've got some clan-graded equipment on there. It's going to be probably fairly popular amongst the AFFS. Finally, we're going to talk about the Axman Lancer. This one you've probably seen in arenas every once in a while. This is not a typical model, though, but it's been on Solaris for a little bit, and I do know a guy who's bought one. It's basically an AXM-3S with the hatchet replaced with a Battletech Lance. It's basically a massive pile driver, and the goal of it is to just, get close to someone and just punch through the armor straight to the internals with it. The Guardian ECM on these things are removed and replaced with a supercharger because in the arena, the Guardian ECM is not going to be that useful. And the boost of speed is going to be pretty useful. The armor is made a little bit thicker as well. For weapons, you get the standard stuff you would get on an XM3S, so a bunch of medium lasers and an LB20X. Perfect arena mech. It's going to work really well. I don't know if you've got a version with triple strength myomer out there. There's probably a mech jock that spent too much money making one, but it's quite a decent little machine. The Axman really has a role in popular culture, and it really has a role in warfare as well. You've seen them quite a bit on various TV shows, but you've also seen them on battlefields if you've looked at various records. Yes, it probably can't match most clan machine in the same range. It can brawl like a champ, but once the fighting gets a little bit further out, you're going to start needing some specialized variants or hope for the best. Yes, it can chop off a head in a single blow, so it always remains a threat, especially if it just, jump and just gets behind you and you're like, well, there's an Axman, and just chops through your plates. I've seen plenty of rifleman pilots have a bad day because of that. The jump jets is really what provides it enough mobility to be a good mech in its particular category. I do think it's far superior to the Hatchetman, at least in that brawler role. So I thank you very much for listening to me for so long. I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day, and see you guys later. Bye-bye.